Tonight on Greater Boston, after a months-long battle between the yes and no forces on question one, the so-called millionaire's tax or fair share amendment, it's now enshrined in the Massachusetts Constitution with the revenue it raises intended for transportation and education. But when the tax increase takes effect next year, will the money actually make it to those places? The heads of the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center and the Massachusetts Teachers Association, two leaders of the campaign, join me. Plus, Twitter's only been under new management for about a week, but CEO Elon Musk's many moves have already prompted a flood of users to leave. What does this mean for the future of the platform as a place to both fight oppression and spread misinformation? Someone who won't leave and another whose bags are packed, sitting by the door, considering to exit. They both join me. In addition to the all-Democratic and nearly all-female slate of candidates elected to statewide office last week, 3 out of 4 of the ballot questions were also voted into law. That includes the highly contested question 1, which passed with just 52%, the narrowest margin among all 4 ballot questions. The measure, also known as the millionaire's tax or the fair share amendment, imposes an additional 4% surtax on top of the already existing statewide 5% income tax on any household income exceeding $1 million. Supporters of the tax touted the additional revenue. Estimates fall in the $1 to $2 billion range annually, which was earmarked for education and transportation, though opponents said state lawmakers will get the final say on the spending. They also warned the measure could cost jobs and drive wealthier citizens out of the state, though many believe that kind of backlash will be minimal. So what can we expect after the new tax takes effect on January 1st? To discuss, I'm joined by leaders of Yes on One, the president of the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center, Marie Frances Rivera, and president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, which contributed many millions to the effort, Max Page. Max, Marie Frances, good to see you both.
Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it. Max, starting with you, as you know, there have been 5 prior efforts to tax wealthier people in the state at a higher rate. I led the most recent one 28 years ago. Every one of them has been crushed, literally crushed. What was different this time? Why'd you win?
Well, Jim, I think we won for a number of reasons. One is we put together a truly incredible campaign. I think one of the very best grassroots campaigns that's ever been launched in the state. I think we crafted this very intelligently. That is, we really wanted to make sure we were focusing on the very, very wealthiest individuals in the Commonwealth who've gotten wealthier over the past 28 years since you worked on this and have gotten wealthier even during the pandemic. And on the flip side, we wanted to make sure that the public knew that the money would be going to things they care deeply about. Public education, pre-K through public higher education, and roads, bridges, and public transportations. So both parts of that equation, I think, really appealed to the voters. And I know it was close, but that's 100,000 votes.
Yeah.
For something that has been a third rail in Massachusetts politics.
You know, Marie Frances, a couple of things that weren't close were the spending. Your side, in great part funded by Max's organization and the national organization, outspent the opponents 2 to 1, 28 to 14 million. Plus, the most popular governor in America, while he opposed the question, didn't do it publicly with a passion. If either of those things had been changed, if there had been a level playing field on money and Baker had made this a crusade, do you think you'd be talking about a victory tonight?
So what I would say is that what this win shows is the power of inclusive democracy. When people have accurate facts, and one of the facts that has changed is that income inequality and the nature of our tax code, the upside down nature of our tax code, has just gotten increasingly worse over the decades. And voters felt that. Voters felt the, underfunding in schools. As a mother of somebody who sends their child to public school, I see the investments that are needed, right? I see the investments that are needed in the T. So people are seeing that, and it's no surprise that the vote turned out the way that it did.
Can we talk about both issues that Max raised a minute ago, starting with you, Marie Frances, the taxing of the wealthy and the spending and where it's targeted in the ballot question, now in the Constitution. Marie Frances, starting with you, Chris Doty, who ran for the Republican nomination for governor, he lost obviously to Jeff Deal, was on NECN on election night, and he said something like he had spoken to at least 100 wealthy individuals, business leaders, who said they were leaving Massachusetts because of this additional tax. 1, are you buying it? And 2, are you concerned about it?
So the anecdotes and the data that we have analyzed don't show the same thing. What we've seen in states like California, states like New York, who do have higher tax margins on wealthy, on wealth and income taxes, we've seen that actually, the estimates that were, when they've raised their tax rates that have supposedly are going to come in, they're even higher than they come in, than estimates show. We've seen that millionaires aren't fleeing those states. And we know that people are here in Massachusetts for a lot of reasons. Taxes aren't on the top of the list why people are here, even though we do have actually average taxes when you look at Massachusetts compared to the rest of the country. So.
Yeah, Max, also what I had not even thought about during the campaign until I did some of the reading afterwards, and I'm sure you have thought about it, is while the rates are in the Constitution, and I think that's one of the things that was to your benefit, so the legislature, which is not wildly beloved in this state, can't mess with that. What they can do is they can change things like how much of a capital gain on the sale of your house is excluded from income, meaning raise it if they chose to do that, and thus have fewer people exposed to the tax. If they attempted to do some of those things to protect people just over the threshold, for example, the infamous one-time millionaires that was talked about nonstop near the end of the campaign, would the MTA oppose that?
Well, look, there's a lot of actually good incentives or write-offs that we talked about and the Marie Francis's organization spoke about in terms of housing. $500,000 for a couple comes off of a capital gain,
right,
which is why the vast majority of the houses that might be subject to this are really mansions, multi-million-dollar mansions, not someone who may have seen their house grow in value. What I want to say is that the key here is that we're going to be this great coalition, the Raise Up Mass Coalition, and that the MTA has been part of, is going to be watching and supporting and insisting that the money gets spent on the needs that are there in public education and public transportation. And I think that that's the main thing we want to see.
But what's the answer? I hear that. We're going to get to that in a second. What's the answer to my question, though? If they wanted to essentially change the tax system in ways they're permitted to do to have fewer people subject to the tax, would you oppose that? Would your coalition oppose that?
What I'm saying at the moment, we would have to all discuss this. The key is, though, that what Marie Francis's organization Mass Budget found is that the houses in the past year that would have been affected by this were on average $3.8 million. So I guess the point is, let's see, but we have a feeling that what's really going to be subject to this are multi-million-dollar homes and not that many of them.
Okay.
So
what I'll jump in and add too is that the changes that the Fair Share Amendment tax is making in just making our tax code more just is pretty monumental. And any other shifts to our tax code that would benefit wealthy individuals would then take us back a step. So that's something that we would have to look at.
Can we talk about the spending for a little bit? I don't want to debate ad nauseum. The whole issue is the legislature required by constitutional provision to spend all the money on transportation and education, because I have a feeling we disagree. I think the subject to appropriation language does give them latitude. So for argument's sake, as you both, I think, know, candidate Healy was on a radio show in October, and I asked her my usual very long-winded question you'll hear in a second, and she gave a one-word answer, which I know made you happy. Here she is, and here I am. Are you prepared to say that if elected governor, you'll honor the voters' mandate if it passes and veto any legislative attempt to divert money, newly raised money by the millionaires tax, away from education and transportation?
Yes.
A woman of few words, I should say there. But there's something that probably, at least in my estimation, might make you not quite so happy. Here also in October is the second gubernatorial debate. Janet Wu from CVB asking Maura Healey a question.
If elected, Ms. Healey, where will you focus your attention first to alleviate their budget worries?
Cutting taxes. Cutting taxes. We also need to pass the tax reforms that Governor Baker proposed. These were tax cuts for seniors, renters, low-income, middle-income families. They included things like changes to the estate tax and, importantly, earned income credit for families.
You know, this is for you, Marie Francis, since you're the tax expert here. This tax, that the surtax that you guys won on the ballot, question 1, would raise anywhere from 1.2, according to some people, billion a year to $2 billion a year. The tax cuts that Governor Baker proposed that the legislature didn't pass, that Maura Healey has advocated for nonstop, would cost somewhere just short of $1 billion. Are you not worried about the financial situation and the trade-off there and the pressure on the legislature? When I asked Maura Healey that question, she said, well, we have big surplus. Well, as you know, surplus is not a continuing thing. Both the tax cuts and question 1 would be continuing things. Doesn't that put a lot of pressure on the legislature in terms of what dollars are available to spend on education and transportation, Marie Francis?
Correct. So just to be clear, the tax proposals that Governor Baker proposed, some were one-time and some were more permanent changes. And some were benefiting lower income families, and some, like the estate tax, would directly benefit high income and high wealth families. So I would say, as we think about how to make our tax code more fair, we have to consider and be very clear about who these potential tax changes would impact.
Yeah, but Max, what I'm trying to get at is, obviously Marie Francis is right, they affect different people in different ways. I've been dealing with the legislature a long time in my former life. You deal with it now, Mass Tax Teachers Association, pretty powerful player. They're going to be competing pressures. There's the voter endorsed question 1, raising money, 1.2 to $2 billion to spend on these 2 subject matter areas. And on the other hand, there's a lot of money that's going to be coming out if Maura Healey gets her way in terms of this tax break. Does that not worry you in terms of the people on Beacon Hill honoring the message of the voters?
Well, so Jim, it's been less than a week since the election, so you're going to have a hard time making me worried. At the moment, I'm very, very, very pleased about this incredible victory that took 107 years to get since they created.
How about when you do start worrying? Are you going to worry about that?
Well, what we're most not worried about, what we're going to be most conscientious about, that is our broad coalition, is that the full amount, and we expect it's $2 billion. We actually think it may be more than that. Goes to additional spending on public education and transportation, period. And then there's going to be a debate about whether there's some good, tax cuts that are necessary to support working people and others that are not. But I think we want to follow up on what now Governor-elect Healey said, which is she would veto it. And I think she also said that it needs to be in addition to existing.
She did say that. I want one more thing for you, Max, in terms of the spending. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's no mandate that the whatever amount is raised is split down the middle between transportation and education. Is that not correct?
That's absolutely correct.
So the vast majority of the funding for Yes on One came from your organization and your parent organization nationally, the National Education Association. Is there not going to be a lot of pressure on you from your 100,000 plus members that a disproportionate share of this be spent in the subject matter area where the money came from, education as opposed to transportation?
So, Jim, from the very beginning, the MTA members in our organization and the National Education Association have been committed to the 3 parts of this: K-12 schools, public higher ed, and roads, bridges, and transportation. Because guess what? Our members travel on the roads and on transportation. The families of our students and our students themselves need public transportation and roads and bridges. So we're committed to investments across that whole array of investments that are needed.
Last thing for both of you. I think Max said a minute ago it was 107 years, whatever it was, Marie Francis. What is a lesson that you'd transfer to people who say, you had no choice but to go to the ballot because you're changing the Constitution? But for those frustrated with inaction on Beacon Hill or action they don't like, what's your takeaway from this experience on question 1 that you think might be replicable or transferable to other campaigns? What would you say to those people?
Facts and getting involved. Like I said at the top, it's about inclusive democracy. And one thing that, we have a myriad of partners that we work with, organizers all around the state that use our information. And, as soon as the governor's budget proposal hits on March, the beginning of March, we'll be there providing really transparent information so that people can get involved in the process.
How about you, Max?
Well, I think we built an incredible campaign. We knocked on over 1 million doors. There were a couple hundred different organizations involved in this. So, of course, we had to spend a lot of money on things like advertisements and mailing and the like. We also really dedicated to the entire campaign, dedicated supporting community groups that went out door to door, made phone calls. I think that's a lasting lesson that makes the difference in the end. The other side had, 4 billionaires and 2 multimillionaires funding them, and they never knocked on a door. And we are actually building for the long term. And it's worth reminding people that this is the latest effort going back to winning universal sick leave, the minimum wage, which will go up to $15 on January 1st, paid family and medical leave, and for the MTA, stopping the charter schools in 2016, winning the Student Opportunity Act for public schools, and now winning this great, question 1 for tax fairness. So there's a movement going on, and I think this whole campaign built on the previous victories and will frankly set us up for other ones in the future.
Max, Marie Francis, congratulations to you and your colleagues both. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Next up, there have been a lot of problems at Twitter over the years, from sexual harassment, racism, and hate speech to dangerous, sometimes deadly misinformation. But over the weekend, CEO and chief troll officer Elon Musk took on a much more pressing problem. Senator Ed Markey, who called on Musk to answer for his new Twitter Blue system, which allows users to pay for those same blue checks that used to only identify those accounts attributed to celebrities, politicians, and other verified people in the public eye. The new fee-based system made it easier for people to impersonate public figures, including over at the Washington Post, which created a fake account in Markey's name to show just how simple it was. In response, Musk tweeted, "Perhaps it's because your real account sounds like a parody." Markey followed up, urging Musk to get Twitter under control, along with his electric car company, Tesla, which is under federal investigation for safety issues. He wrote, "Fix your companies or Congress will." But before the verification chaos, there were the mass firings, including teams dedicated to fighting racial bias in the Twitter algorithm and combating misinformation. Not surprisingly, in the first few hours after Musk's takeover, the use of hate speech exploded on the platform. It's all been more than enough to make Boston Globe columnist Renee Graham think about leaving Twitter for good, though for now she says she's still hanging on, as she wrote, with bags packed, sitting by the door, unlike Tom Nichols, an international affairs expert, staff writer at The Atlantic and author of its Peacefield newsletter, who says he is going nowhere. Tom, Renee, good to see you both.
Good to see you, Jim.
Tom, you're pretty emphatic that you're not leaving. Why?
Well, for one thing, I think it's there's too much kind of performative outrage. If Trump wins, I'm going to Canada kind of approach to this. It's a public square. It's a public space. Musk is determined to ruin it. And part of the way it gets worse is if normal human beings simply walk away. My user experience is curated so that I don't see a lot of stuff that annoys me. I just like browsing in a bookstore or anywhere else. But I also think it's important to stay there and not be run off. I mean, people talk about staying and fighting against misinformation and authoritarianism. Well, this is one way to do it. It's just to be there as a source of information rather than to just get up and leave.
So, Renee, are your bags still packed sitting by the door, or they've moved since you last wrote that?
No, they are sitting there. I've tripped over them a few times, but they're still sitting there waiting for me when I'm ready. The thing for me is this, and I do see Tom's point, of course. I don't want to leave Twitter. I genuinely like Twitter. However, everyone knows that the most targeted people on Twitter are Black women. And I can only stand being called the N-word so many times in a day. And that has increased since Elon Musk took over. And I have my account as locked down as it could possibly be because of an incident that happened a few years ago. But it just gets to a point where I can, I don't want to keep hearing the N-word, seeing the N-word. I don't want to be inundated with crypto ads and NFT ads and all the other nonsense that's been unleashed in the last, it's not even been 3 weeks, since he took over.
So Renee, why are you waiting by the door? Why, based on what you said, why haven't you decided I'm out of here?
Because there's that part of me that doesn't like to be chased. There's a part of me that doesn't like to be run out the door, and I will leave when I am ready to leave, not when I'm pushed. I will jump, but I will not be pushed. So there's a bit of stubbornness that plays into that for me as well, and I think that's why I'm still hanging on.
Both of you, if I read correctly in pieces you've written, are not crazy about what many are suggesting is an alternative, Mastodon, and I think most people who had never heard of it know that as compared to Twitter with 240 million users, Mastodon has only 1 million. If there was a suitable alternative, sort of like, I don't know, like Tidal was for people who chose to leave Spotify several months ago, would you choose that option, Tom?
I think, again, I'm really where Renee is. I'm just too stubborn and maybe I'm just too old to go and learn, an entirely new system just because a guy with the maturity of a, spoiled 10-year-old took over the platform. And I should add, Renee's point is really well taken. It's easy for me to say I'm going to stick around. I'm a middle-aged white guy, who doesn't get, the experience for women and especially women of color on Twitter gets really rough. The only thing that I ever experienced that was close to that is when I first started writing and tweeting against Donald Trump, and I started getting death threats, pretty regularly, and that can be really unnerving. It's meant to be unnerving. So I guess that comes back down to the, are you going to be chased off by a bunch of people whose intention is to make you uncomfortable and chase you off? And my answer to that has been pretty much to ignore those people and to change my Twitter settings so that I mostly don't see them. So this alternative system, to me, it's just too complicated, and it gives in to the being chased off vibe.
No, I understand. You're both saying that, but Renee, I think we've only had a couple of weeks of Musk as the chief twit, as he said originally. I assume you'd both agree that the infrastructure to limit harassment or abuse or to incite violence has been weakened. So, I don't know, a year out, is Twitter the hellscape that Elon Musk promised advertisers it would not become, Renee?
I don't know that there may be a Twitter in a year from now, the way things are going. He's threatened to, bankrupt the company, and advertisers are fleeing, and users are leaving. I don't know that we're going to have a Twitter, or at least the Twitter people have known for the last decade or so, in a year from now. It's unfortunate. I think there's a lot of good that Twitter can do. I think there are a lot of connections and communities that Twitter has created. But you have this one person who's decided to blow it all up, including a lot of the infrastructure that has kept it from completely collapsing into a hellscape.
By the way, just to advance what you said there for a second before we get Tom's response, leaders of things from Arab Spring to Black Lives Matter and beyond would agree with what you had to say, not that it was flawless. But how about that prediction about where it ends up, not ends up, but Tom, even in a finite period of time, a year under Elon Musk, assuming that both stay together for that year, what does it look like in a year, do you think?
Well, this is always the place where it's easy to get burned with predictions. So I'll just make predictions that'll probably turn out to be wrong. My Twitter experience hasn't changed that much. I've seen an increase in some ads, more kind of trollish accounts trying to show up and, tug on my sleeve here and there. I think another possibility, and the most optimistic possibility, is that Musk will get bored with this and just have to turn it over to some professionals who can actually keep the lights on, keep it running, because the infrastructure of this thing will eventually collapse. You can't fire all your engineers and just think that Twitter, you plug it into the wall and it goes. And so it's quite possible that this will be a short-term problem that, Twitter either collapses or it regains something like adult supervision in much less than a year. I mean, there's no way that this goes on like this, for a year with this at this kind of rate. But I don't think it's going to go on for a year. I think actually there are going to be some grown-ups that are just going to have to take charge at some point.
Well, are among the grown-ups, Tom Nichols, are among the grown-ups Congress? I mean, the line from Markey that I quoted a minute ago, Senator Markey, fix your companies or Congress will. Is there a place for Congress, assuming they understand how this all works, to regulate Twitter if it can't regulate itself? Jim,
I'm a pretty extreme civil libertarian. I don't like the idea of government regulating anything that has anything to do with speech. Where I think it's possible that government may look closely is the way Musk has run the company, in terms of the treatment of employees and labor laws and things like that.
But not as to the speech, not as to the content.
I would really be uncomfortable with that.
Renee, are you any more comfortable with government intervention at some level? I mean, both Biden and Trump agreed for different reasons that the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which allows people that own platforms not to be responsible for the content, needed some fixing. Is there any government fixing that you would be comfortable with vis-a-vis the free speech aspect, the speech aspect of this?
I mean, Jim, I think it's a slippery slope. I think when you have the government sort of stepping in and deciding what can and can't be, you get into really weird places. However, I do think something needs to be done about the potential, and it's already happened, for misinformation and disinformation. Maybe I'm not the person to ask that question. Maybe you should ask the people who run Eli Lilly and what happened to them last week when someone impersonated their account and said that insulin will now be free, and their stock went crazy, and now they're pulling every ad off of Twitter. I mean, there's something to be said for that. And, part of it was funny. It was sort of funny that, Jesus got, verified.
Yes.
But I think it gets into a darker area where someone who might really use this sort of thing for nefarious purposes.
By the way, it took Twitter 6 hours to respond to Lily's concerns about the false information. I only have a minute left. Should I assume, Tom Nichols, based upon your self-description a minute ago, that you would be okay with Elon Musk doing what he said he would do and putting Donald Trump back on Twitter?
Yeah. I think, if it's his company, if he wants to give Donald Trump a platform, that's up to him. What I wouldn't want is for the government to tell him that he must give Trump a platform or that he can't give Trump a platform. I think it's impossible to get away from Trump's poisoning of our public life. In some ways, I'd almost rather he be on Twitter so that we know what he's up to. I did want to add one thing about government regulation.
Please.
I think one place that is a concern is how much of Twitter may be owned by foreign countries.
Saudi Arabia in particular.
Then I think it becomes, if suddenly something that is so widely used in America becomes owned by a foreign company, at the very least, there needs to be a lot of transparency.
I only have 15 seconds left, Renee. How do you feel about the Trump restoration?
I think it's likely Trump will be back. And if Trump is back, then that's going to get my bags probably out the door.
Perfect place to end. Renee Graham, Tom Nichols, thank you both for your time and your work. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for watching. And please don't forget Ukraine.